Today we're going to talk about the Durston Ringer. The Ringer is designed to mass produce jump rings in a fast and efficient way. The set comprises of a coil winder, a flexible shaft holder, a set of mandrels. There's 20 mandrels in the set, ranging from 2.5mm to 12mm, and the set comes in its own handy tray. We also have a coil holder, which is double-sided, a pot of lubricant, there's 3 Allen keys, and we have the blade and the blade holder. So let's first talk about the coil winder. The coil winder comes with its own dedicated holder, which can be firmly screwed onto the bench, or alternatively you can use a vise. My preference is to hold the coil winder in a vise. So let's first of all place the coil winder into a vise. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to make some 6mm inside diameter jump rings from a 1mm diameter wire. So the first thing we need to do is to take our 6mm mandrel and place it into the coil winder. We tighten up the chuck. It's a keyless chuck, which makes it very simple to do. Now you'll notice that at one end of the mandrel there is a hole. The purpose of this hole is to place the wire, which allows us to start forming our coil. On the smaller 3 sizes of mandrel there is no hole, so we have to place the wire in between the 2 chuck jaws into the chuck to hold the wire. So let's just take our 1mm round wire. And the first thing to do is to just place it into the mandrel hole, and then gently turning clockwise we start to form a coil. Now we're using our thumb to gently guide the jump rings so that there is no gap and each jump ring is very tight to the jump ring next to it. Once we're comfortable that they're forming in this orderly way, we can continue on and speed up the process. We need to be aware that as we come towards the end of the wire, the coil will have some tension in it and it will want to spring back. So what we don't want to happen is to cut our thumb. So we need to just slow down the process and just allow the wire to form over to the front and then just allow it to uncoil itself. Allow the wire to come around and just gently form it over with your finger, and then carefully move your finger away whilst the tension is released from the coil. So we now have our coil formed and we need to remove it from the mandrel, and the easiest way to do this is to remove the mandrel from the coil holder. And what we'll need to do next is just to snip the end of the wire that went through the hole in the mandrel, and then gently remove the coil from the mandrel. Now what we also need to do at this point is just to tidy up the ends so that there's no sharp ends sticking up in the air, so that everything is in line. So we now have our coil ready to be placed into the coil holder. Now before we can cut the jump rings, we're going to need to prepare the flex shaft with its flex shaft holder and the blade. So the first thing we do is we take our flexible shaft. Now this could be a Dremel or a Foredom of an appropriate size diameter shaft. We then take our flex shaft holder and we slide it over the handpiece, just leaving it floating there for the time being. We then take our blade, which we have prepared earlier, and place it into the chuck. We then tighten that down into the chuck like so. We then take the flexible shaft holder and just move the blade up into the centre of the open cutting face. Now you'll notice that there is a line that has been engraved into this centre of this cutting face, and that is a guide for us to line the blade up against. And once we have the blade in the correct location, We can then tighten the two locating screws down onto the flexible shaft. You don't need to go too tight with that, it's just to grip the shaft. So once we have the blade located centrally on the flexible shaft holder, we can just check that it's in the correct place by placing the coil holder lid just over the top. We'll notice that the blade fits easily in the gap, and you can see how that can then cut the jump rings once the whole jig is assembled. Now I'm going to tidy everything away first of all, because we need to create some space for us to use the flexible shaft. The coil holder can either be screwed to the bench, as we have done here, or alternatively you can place it in a vise. I prefer to have it onto the bench because it sits in a nice position and lines up nicely with the flexible shaft. The first thing we need to do is to take our coil and place it into the coil holder. We locate it just up against the key that's at the end. We take some of the lubricant that's provided and we rub it over the top of the coil. This will help to preserve the life of the blade and also make the cut a lot smoother. We then need to take the lid of the coil holder and the two knurled bolts that are provided. We place the lid on top of the coil and then locate the two bolts into their screw holes. And making sure that we screw down the same amount on each end, we just tighten the lid onto the top of the coils. We don't go too tight because we don't want to squash the jump rings, but that is all set up and ready to go. We then take the flexible shaft handpiece and we place it in the end of the coil holder, and we are now ready to make the cut. There we have it, the cut is complete. Now we just need to undo the top plate. We can reveal a successfully cut coil of jump rings. All created in a super fast time, I think you'll agree.